The Associate Health Minister, Costello, has denied any dealings with the tobacco industry while facing questions on her credibility from health professionals.
Despite enormous efforts to OIA and WPQ me, there has been no association with the tobacco industry, and that has not been where I have gone to for advice. So just to put that to bed.
But Costello's rebuttals have not put the subject to bed. Certainly experts on smoking harm at the Health Coalition Aotearoa conference this week didn't seem to think it had.
There's a number of really close dots between her and her party and Philip Morris.
And opposition MPs are still cynical.
It's pretty interesting that her wish list seems to pretty clearly align with the wish list of the tobacco lobby.
She even ended up with a report in her office that some might say could have been written by tobacco lobbyists.
I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, what has the New Zealand First MP done that has everyone asking if she's working hand in glove with big tobacco, and health professionals calling for her to be sacked?
Health experts are outraged at a minister's proposal to bring in a 3-year freeze on tobacco excise tax.
There are calls for the Associate Health Minister, Costello, to be sacked after documents emerged revealing she likened nicotine harm to caffeine.
Health Coalition's calling for her to be replaced as Associate Minister of Health, given all of these policies she's come out with, which are really supporting the tobacco industry's position.
Reversing smoke-free legislation that had been lauded as world-leading, saying nicotine is as harmful as caffeine, slashing the excise tax on heated tobacco products, or HTPs, in half, proposing a freeze on excise tax on tobacco, which would have made cigarettes relatively cheaper. This hasn't happened. But they're changes the New Zealand First MP has pushed in legislation that line up with the ideals of the tobacco lobby. And there's a mystery document that she's used to back up her moves.
Despite the notes coming from Costello's office, she says she doesn't know who wrote them.
Mr Speaker, I couldn't tell you the author of that document. It's in the document archives.
Do things in her office just appear out of thin air?
A document she first denied existed, then refused to release, leading to a telling off from Chief Ombudsman Peter Boshier for falling foul of the Official Information Act. And now Boshier has upped the ante in a rare and unusual move. He's notified the chief archivist about her record-keeping issues, releasing a new investigation into her handling of the document, saying he's concerned Costello was unable to point to where it came from.
Look, she hasn't really helped herself, has she, in the transparency stakes?
RNZ in-depth investigative reporter Guyon Espiner has been driving this story from the beginning.
If you go right back, there has been a lack of transparency. There has been a willingness to try not to release information, which has eventually come out in a number of ways. And by the last count, she's been pinged twice by the Ombudsman, once for acting contrary to law to try to keep secret information about her vaping and tobacco plans.
And that's when he told her to apologise to you, essentially, to RNZ.
To RNZ and also to a public health researcher, Janet Hook. And the second time, most recently, he criticised her and referred her to the chief archivist. Many people probably learned we had a chief archivist for the first time, possibly if they read that story. But there's a couple of times now where she's been reprimanded by the Ombudsman, by the Chief Ombudsman, for a lack of transparency in dealing with Official Information Act requests.
This is the latest development. Let's talk about what Peter Boshier has done here, because she has a document that's a mystery document. She says it landed magically on a desk. She just no idea how it happened. And he's asked for the provenance of that document to be looked at. Is that right?
That's right. And the chief archivist is going to look at that. We have something called the Public Records Act where, I suppose the analogy that people might have seen in the news internationally of late is, Donald Trump or President Biden, the way they kept their information. President Trump kept his at Mar-a-Lago and President Biden had secret documents that was just sitting around his house. The analogy I've got here is that there is a certain way you have to keep public records and public information, right? Because we draw on them for historical purposes and to work out how decisions were made. So that's important. So the Chief Archivist will look at that. But just to bring you back a little bit, yes, this document, which we're referring to as the mystery document, is important for a number of reasons. It has formed the basis of a number of development of public policy positions. Casey Costello has said that this document arrived in her office on the 6th of December last year, and that she doesn't know who wrote it, and that she doesn't even know how it came to be on her desk, but she gave it to the Ministry of Health to enable them to help develop public policy around tobacco control. Now, the contents of that document are pretty fascinating. We've got the full document because it was leaked to us. There's a redacted version that she eventually was forced to give us, so we've been able to compare the two. But it's a highly politically charged document. It talks about the smoke-free generation stuff that Labour was trying to get through as nanny state nonsense, that New Zealanders were being treated as guinea pigs, that no one else in the world has been stupid enough to do this, and also makes a very strong case for tax cuts for tobacco, which Casey Costello has eventually done. So there's a lot of that in that document that is pretty pertinent, and also it's a highly politically charged document. And
it appears to be her blueprint for action.
There are a lot of moves in there that she has pursued, yes.
The similarities in that document to phrases used by the tobacco industry are fairly out there, right? They're fairly obvious.
Yeah, there are. And my colleague Kate Newton has looked at this as well, where she compared language and arguments used by the tobacco industry for a number of years with the kind of phrases and arguments used in that document, and there is a big overlap. One of the key ones that people might remember is the idea that nicotine is as harmful as caffeine in that comparison. Now, that has been an argument that the tobacco industry has used for many years, and that is a phrase that you will see in that document.
So what happens if the public archivist works out that this document came from the tobacco industry?
Well, all hell breaks loose at that point, I would imagine.
The PM's political risk radar is going off, seeking assurances no one's taking money from big tobacco.
My office spoke to the officers of the other parties to confirm that those parties both came back to say that they haven't received their donations from tobacco companies.
Trying himself to find out if the old saying, where there's smoke, there's fire, rings true.
Look, it's very hard to prove that, isn't it? And the context here too is, and we should point this out, and I've only gone as far as the facts will allow me to go, as any journalist will, frankly. But it is true that there are two very senior people at Philip Morris in their communications division who used to be very senior officials in New Zealand First. This is just a fact. Appy Dawson and David Broome. Now, David Broome was the Chief of Staff for New Zealand First, and Appy Dawson worked on a couple of election campaigns and was a very senior New Zealand First official. Now, they are now both senior corporate communications people at Philip Morris. So that's pretty pertinent. I can't prove that it goes beyond that, but what we should also lay out is that the 50% excise cut to smokeless tobacco, or what are called heated tobacco products, that Casey Costello instituted or implemented, largely favours one company, because there is one company that dominates, almost to a monopoly point, the heated tobacco products market, and that is Philip Morris.
Heated tobacco products are not vapes and they're not cigarettes. They're a battery-operated device that heats rather than burns tobacco, and you inhale the vapour, which contains nicotine. Health researchers point out that almost all of the research on the potentially toxic chemicals contained in this vapour comes from tobacco companies, so they're not convinced that they're any better than cigarettes or that they help people quit smoking. The government's agreed to set aside $216 million that it may need to cover lost revenue from cutting the excise tax in half. But Costello says she doesn't expect the cost to be anywhere near that, as last year the tax collected on HTPs was just under $6 million. Guy Espiner is choosing his words on the connections between an MP and the tobacco industry very carefully.
when you lay out the facts, they are the facts, which is part of the reason that it's been driving me to try to keep unturning the stones on this, because that is material and, we need, I think, in the public debate, a high degree of transparency over this. And there is worldwide a high degree of transparency over tobacco policy. There's a World Health Organization compact that we've signed up to that says any communication you have with the tobacco industry has to be logged. We do this. It's called 5.3, clause under the framework on tobacco control, that you have to log all these things. Why? Because the tobacco industry has a long and storied history of getting involved in public policy and skewing things in their order. Now, I can't prove that any of this has happened in this case, but it is a very strong argument why we need great degrees of transparency on this issue.
And no meetings have been logged?
No, I look every now and again because you can see it and trace it on the Ministry of Health website. And no, I've seen no records under this government at all of communications with the tobacco industry. But again, you'd need to rely on the fact that there's a certain amount of good faith that relies on. Yeah, I can't prove otherwise, but I haven't seen any evidence of those meetings, no.
When questioned about these things, she's said things that weren't quite true. She's obfuscated, she's dodged things. Has she outright lied so far?
I choose my words carefully. She certainly didn't tell the full truth when initially interviewed on this. I asked her about a number of things. There were 2 or 3 things that she said she wasn't considering or she hadn't asked for advice on, and the official advice said the opposite. Now, people listening to this can choose their own words for that. I'm careful about the words that I use. But also the story about the mystery document seems to have changed numerous times too, because she initially, in response to a written question by a Cheverell, Labour's health spokesperson, claimed that there hadn't been a document written at all, that somehow that she'd just fired off to officials Hansard records, which are the records of the debates in Parliament, former policy positions from New Zealand First and a whole bunch of other stuff. Now she acknowledges that yes, there was a document, but it only arrived in hard copy and she's got no idea who wrote it. She's told the Ombudsman in that recent investigation that you referenced that this material was put together long before the coalition agreement was formed. But I've got the full document and it starts with the coalition agreement. So it's clear that it was finished after the coalition had been signed. So, yeah, inconsistencies, choose your words. I'll let people make up their own minds on that.
Guyon would like to talk to the Associate Minister to get her to clear up a few things, but she seems to be avoiding him.
I haven't been able to get an interview with Casey Costello all year, since January. She gave one initial interview, said several inconsistent things, started the trouble rolling, and she won't do an interview with me since.
Won't do an interview. Of you go.
Goes on other platforms, but won't do an interview with me. So what do you do with that?
Let's just take away for a minute, just pretend that the tobacco industry has had nothing to do with this. What are the solid reasons for making these changes? Because when the first one happened, the Smoke-Free Amendments Act was repealed, I did a podcast on it and I could not find anyone who said this is the right thing to do. So what are the political reasons, apart from turning back everything that Labour has done, what would the political rationale be for making these moves?
Yeah, OK. Well, I suppose there's a couple of things. Just to touch on the repeal of the smoke-free generation, their argument would be that prohibition doesn't work and that also we're punishing the poor and the addicted.
National MPs found themselves having to explain the move. Here's Finance Minister Nicola Willis.
The logic from both ACT and New Zealand First, when they came to the negotiating table, was their concern that changes planned for the future to those laws would have a couple of nasty side effects. One, they were concerned about the emergence of a big black market for tobacco, unregulated, untaxed. Second, they were concerned that by vastly reducing the number of retail outlets to around 600, that we could see a huge increase in retail crime, ram raids, people being put in danger.
That's their argument. It's not necessarily my belief, but that's their argument that at this point, with only 6% of people daily smoking actual cigarettes, that those people are the hardcore addicted, often from poorer communities, and that the way to get them off cigarettes is onto vaping. Now, then you come to a harm reduction argument, and this is their argument that that vaping has been a powerful tool in smoking cessation. Yes, it's created problems for our younger people, but they argue that it's got adults off smoking and it's less harmful. It's a harm reduction method. Now, she would argue the same with heated tobacco products, that she's cut the excise because those products are less harmful than cigarettes, and she wants to make them more attractive to people.
Okay, so the moves that she's made so far, they could well be a genuinely held political view that she is doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think they could be. And like most ideas in politics, they're contestable. I've got no issue with that. These are contestable ideas. I think it's pretty interesting that they fought so hard to get tax cuts for tobacco into the coalition agreements, because it's not something you see people marching in the street for. So that to me is interesting as well. And I think it surprised a lot of people, and there's been a lot of pushback because they didn't expect this to be adopted by the government.
Did New Zealand First campaign on this?
Well, if you look at their manifesto, there are sections in there that say that you should only tax combustible tobacco, that smokeless tobacco should not be subject to excise tax. Remember, vaping doesn't have an excise tax on it at all.
So that's considered by health officials, or some, to be a way out of smoking.
Yes, as a smoking cessation tool. Yeah, which is the point of vaping, right?
Yeah.
The point wasn't to fill our high schools with disposable vape pods.
Which it has done. Yeah. How often is it, or how unusual is it for a government minister to ignore the advice of officials completely in order to get a piece of legislation through?
Oh, that happens. You'll see Treasury say, I don't think this is a good use of money, and the documents come out and the minister said, well, thanks very much for your advice, but we're going to go ahead and do it anyway. So that's not unusual. Her approach to the Official Information Act and the transparency has been very unusual in my experience. So initially, just to come back to that, I asked under the Official Information Act for all the documents related to vaping and tobacco policy late last year. She came back and refused to give me even one word, one page, nothing, and said all of that is protected under this clause of the OAA, which protects the confidentiality of advice tendered by officials. But then the Ombudsman came and said, well, actually, you've breached the OAA, you've acted contrary to law, you have to release this stuff. But time and again, she has fallen foul of those rules, and that's been unusual in my experience. I've not seen an ombudsman say you have to apologise, you've acted contrary to law, and then for a second hit say that I want the Chief Archivist to look at how you've been handling this information. I personally haven't seen that.
So Costello has done a series of sort of things that she's just powered through and kind of seemingly ignored the usual traditions of explaining your actions. What's Luxon's response been to this?
Well, Christopher Luxon, as Prime Minister in a coalition's in a difficult position here, isn't he? And just to put my political hat on for a second, I've covered politics for quite a long time. To ride across and, discipline someone from another party, he's found that very difficult. Other Prime Ministers have had a different attitude. I mean, Helen Clark probably had a greater sway over her coalition partners, but the way that you look at this coalition, it's difficult to see Luxon as the Prime Minister, Chair of the Cabinet, seriously disciplining a minister from another party. And I think that is part of it.
He hasn't even really said, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, that, it's a bit ill-advised, or I'm not sure about this, or, he tends to say, I haven't read that story, or I haven't been briefed on that.
Yeah, again, I haven't seen the stories, and in fairness, I need to be able to have that before I have any further comment.
How can he get away without making some sort of comment? What I'm saying is, why isn't there a bigger fuss about this?
I think largely because he doesn't want to tread on the toes of Winston Peters. He doesn't want to stray into territory which is going to unsettle the coalition. I think that's the political reality of it.
You know, because this verges on issues such as, and I'm not saying it is because we haven't established that she has a direct link to the tobacco industry in spite of the previous involvement of New Zealand First personnel now working for Philip Morris. But this verges on issues like corruption and undue influence. How worrying is that?
Well, I think, again, I personally choose my words carefully, but yeah, influence is something that the public needs to know who is influencing your policy, and that's why we have the Official Information Act, and that's why we can track documents, and that's why we can track, or hope to, who's lobbying for who. So, yeah, influence is very important in this regard, and again, that's why I've been pursuing it. It's an area that I've been interested in, the lobbying industry and who's nudging who. So, yeah, that's a big reason why I've been pursuing this story.
Chris Bullen, a Professor of Public Health at Auckland University, is one of scores of health professionals unhappy with the direction Costello is headed in.
This is unprecedented, and it really goes completely against all the advice, both nationally and internationally, I'm sure, that the Minister has received.
Health researchers are concerned that Costello's statements are coming directly from the tobacco lobby.
What do you do about this? If you're working in the health sector and you spent your whole life trying to convince people not to smoke, what do you do? It seems like everything's going in the reverse order to the progress that was being made for those people.
Well, you leak material to RNZ. No, I mean, look, a lot of the people who've been working in that area would have fought most of their lives on this. And the other people who fought through the Smoke-Free Environments Act and got smoking out of pubs and bars, which again, people said, oh, the world's going to fall in, you can't do this, it's never going to work. So incrementally, they've been winning. And excise tax has gone upwards. This is the first time ever we've had a cut for tobacco excise tax. No one's ever done that. It's always gone the other way. To be fair to them, they will say, and Casey Costello will say, she is committed to smoke-free 2025.
We're dealing with just under 300,000 people who are daily smokers. They are now addicted smokers. And I'm committed to looking at the very best options to getting those people away from smoking,
which is having fewer than 5% of people smoking. So there's an argument or a acceptance that there will always be some people who are smoking cigarettes. Her argument is a harm reduction model, that it's better for people to be vaping and to use these heated tobacco products than it is for them to be smoking combustible tobacco, and that's why she's cutting the excise tax on these heated tobacco products to make them more attractive relative to smoking. So in terms of smoking, combustible cigarettes, she will argue that she doesn't want anyone to do that, and they have that in agreement with Labor, but they are pursuing this model which is quite different from what Labor did. But she reckons that it's the same goal, just different means to reach that goal.
Where do you see Casey Costello going next? Do you think she'll be pulled up short by the Peter Boshier in particular's actions and start revealing more?
Oh, yeah, we still haven't got to the bottom of where this mystery document came from. And I should say to people that this is extremely rare and quite bizarre, that because a minister's office is a very protected area, right? It's, and there's only a small number of staff in there. The idea that this mystery document appears from nowhere isn't good enough for me, which is why I've kept banging on about it, because it just isn't the way things work. The idea that you would have a document that you didn't know where it came from and just suddenly hand that on to the Ministry of Health to help develop policy is just bizarre.
It's just like Harry Potter's invitations to Hogwarts, just floated in underneath the door.
Yeah, the idea that she didn't know where it came from. This is a former detective.
Yes.
Right.
And the police.
Yeah. And so it is kind of weird. I am going to endeavour to keep trying to find out where this document came from, whether the chief archivist can help me. I hope so.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by William Saunders and produced by Gwen McClure. Thanks to Guyon Espiner. I'm Alexia Russell. Mā te wā.